All right, so now more on the midterm essay assignment. Specifically, we're talking about standard grammatical conventions for the essay. A successful essay will also strive to observe standard grammatical conventions. It will run spell check, and it will choose strong, clear, and varied nouns and verbs and varied sentence structure to express its points. So it will be well written, right? It will choose its words carefully. Um, Again, for questions on standard grammar and style, consult owl.english.purdue.edu. And or post your questions to the midterm essay sample papers and optional discussion forum. Okay, so you have a couple different resources, or if you have a grammar book, that you've had in a different English class, feel free to consult that as well. Do not underline or italicize or use quotation marks around your own paper's title. If your title includes another literary work's title, you may use quotation marks or italics, depending on whether that work uses quotation marks or italics around it itself. But with only that other literary work's title, not your own title. You don't ever italicize or put quotation marks around your own title. But if you are referring in your title to somebody else's work, if their work is typically in quotation marks, in other words, it's a short story or a poem, then you also keep it in quotation marks in your title. If it is a longer work, like, let's see, what have we read that's a longer work? If it's a longer work like a novella or a novel, then it will be italicized in your title. But your title itself won't be italicized, just that one title that you're referring to by another author. For example, what if The Awakening, which we will be reading next week, that would be an example of something that is italicized because it's a novella. So typically it's a novel or a novella or a book. Or a play. Actually, plays are italicized if they're longer plays, not a short one act. That would be in quotation marks, a short one act. All right, so there you go. And remember to center your title right in the middle of your essay. All right, in our formal academic writing, do not use contractions. For example, write out something like it's, write it is instead. Or don't, write that out as do not. Or can't, write that out as cannot, etc. Do not use abbreviations. Always write the full term out of a word. Do not write in first person or second person unless this point of view is absolutely essential to convey some piece of information integral to your paper. In other words, do not use the pronouns I or you unless, of course, they are contained in quoted pieces of dialogue. Usually in an academic paper, you don't need to use a story from your own life to write about the literary work. So a story in your own life, obviously you would narrate in the first person, or you would use the pronouns I. I can't really think of an instance in which you'd use you in a literary critical, analytical, formal essay, unless, of course, the you is in the dialogue that you're quoting, or, whatever you're quoting from another work. You only use you when you're directly addressing whoever's reading the paper. And, there are a lot of people who can read the paper, so therefore it's kind of hard to address the reader as you. So typically it's as a good rule of thumb, you'd want to keep out pronouns like I and you from academic writing. All right. Do not use slang or trite expressions. Like, don't say this is good or this is nice. I like this nice piece of writing. No, that's very trite, and you don't use I anyway, right? Use words that count, like Sojourner Truth's speech is powerful. Not nice or good. It's powerful, or it's heart-wrenching, something like that, where you choose a more precise word. All right. Observe proper grammatical and punctuational conventions. See Purdue Owl. Or consult me or some other grammar book if you have questions. You can also, when you run spell check, usually it will check for grammar too. There's also a tool called Grammarly which you'd install on your computer and use that to check grammar too, if you have like a real problem and you're worried. You may consult the information that I have included on how to write essays. I provided lots of little essay helps. But as I said, Purdue OWL also has some too. On MLA format and acceptable grammar and style. All right. Support for essays, thesis points. Of course, make sure the essay has sufficient content. So when I say sufficient content, I mean development of the material and logic to supporting details, examples, facts, figures, illustrations, whatever you need, to make your argument. And your argument will consist of, explaining the meaning or the message that you're elucidating in the work from that historical context or biographical information that you find. All right, remember, as you write, to imagine yourself as a lawyer and imagine the reader as the jury. The burden of proof is yours. The writers, you are the writer. The burden of proof is yours, not the jury's. In other words, not the readers, okay? As a writer or a lawyer in this imagined scenario, you are presenting a case, your argument or analysis to the jury. And in doing so, as a lawyer would, you must also provide the supporting evidence to convince the jury or the reader of your case. In other words, you must prove all you say. All your assertions and observations and points, in this case, you must prove it with detail. Description, dialogue, exemplification, detail, example from the work or from historical information, etc. To make the point that you are developing tangible, visible, in other words, believable to and convincing of the jury, who is the reader, who is me. I'm reading your essay, right? You need to convince me. Or anybody else who reads your essay, right? This is where the use of detail enters and, in fact, becomes essential. Show us, the readers, don't just tell us. In other words, show us, don't just tell us. And of course, do not forget to provide the why or significance behind your paper. Like, why are you telling me this? What's the point of this message? All right. For example, in order to illustrate a thesis point, you could provide dialogue from a story as evidence. Now, suppose I were trying to prove that the old waiter in Ernest Hemingway's short story, A Clean, Well-Lighted Place. You may never have heard that or read it before, but just accept the fact that it exists. It's a short story called A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, and it's by Ernest Hemingway. So in order to prove that the old waiter in that story represents the existentialist who does not believe in anything. Remember nihilism? We actually talked about nihilism this week. So I might then use the following quote as an example from the story to prove this point. Quote, "Our nada, who art in nada, nada be thy name, thy kingdom nada, thy will nada. Give us this nada, our daily nada, and nada us our nada, as we nada our nadas, and nada us not into nada, but deliver us from nada, pues nada. Hail nothing, full of nothing, nothing is with thee." Unquote. Now that is from Abkarian. That's the editor of an English 102 textbook on pages 94 to 95. Okay. I would then go on to explain why this quote illustrates the point I'm trying to make about the old waiter in Hemingway's story. So I would write something like this to explain the quote. I would say, the old waiter recasts the Lord's Prayer. If you could hear that, that was the Lord's Prayer, but it used along with other religious references by substituting the word nada, which means nothing in Spanish. Okay, so nada means nothing. For any religious name whatsoever, as well as other words within those otherwise religious expressions. The old waiter's inclusion of the word nothing, where it would otherwise not belong in these religious references, then highlights the old waiter's existentialist or nihilist view of the world. In other words, where the religious would find a divine maker and provider and meaning, the existentialist finds nothing. where the religious sees meaning and purpose behind events in the world and one's life, the existentialist sees no meaning and no purpose behind these things. The existentialist sees no divine order, no divine plan, no one in control. The existentialist sees nothing because nothing can be proven to have meaning or purpose because God cannot be proven to the existentialist. Nothing can be known to the existentialist but what one directly experiences in this existence. Therefore, if a divine maker or meaning exists beyond this life, it cannot be known to the existentialist because it lies outside the existentialist realm of experience or existence. Hence, the existentialist knows nothing and believes in nothing beyond the literal of this existence. Thus, nada or nothing permeates the old waiter's every religious reference to demonstrate the existential philosophy. Nothingness. Thus, I have just used a quote from the Hemingway story as an example to illustrate and prove a point I was trying to make about the old waiter and about the greater meaning behind the Hemingway piece. Next, I explain the quote and the way it actually illustrates my greater point. You will do likewise. In your own analytical writing for our class, you will choose an overall argument with 3 thesis points. Then you will use details, specifics, examples, like the one I just showed you from the story you choose to analyze to illustrate and prove the thesis point you are trying to develop. You will also explain how the example from the story bears out the point you are trying to establish, just as in my aforementioned example, I explained how the quote I used illustrated and proved my point about the old waiters and the story's underlying existential philosophy. So that is how you will use detail from the literary work and detail from historical information or biographical information to support your interpretation of both, to decipher some sort of meaning or message in the literary work. Okay, good luck. I look forward to reading your analyses of a literary work backed up by biographical and historical information. All right, enjoy and good luck.